let's unpack the current state of Zimbabwe with former President for the Citizens Coalition for Change, Advocate Nelson Chamisa. Advocate Chamisa, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us time here on the AM Report. I think let's start off with the comments made by the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, opposition body or party here in South Africa, who said young Zimbabweans need to fight for their liberation. How do you take that argument, particularly when we speak to the many Zimbabweans that are here living in South Africa, watching the situation back home?
Well, I must say that the statement by, let's say, Julius Malema is an indication of the situation and circumstances the people of Zimbabwe find themselves in. We are in a very difficult space. We have disputed elections. We did not agree in the manner and way the elections were conducted. And there's been that dispute. That dispute is before SADC. That dispute is before the African Union. And that dispute is clearly articulated by all international observer mission reports that they came to the conclusion that the election in Zimbabwe was indeed illegal, irregular, and illegitimate, produced an illegitimate outcome. So that's where we are. And what Comrade Malem is saying is an indication of the desperate circumstances that people of Zimbabwe find themselves in. Almost 5 million Zimbabweans are in the diaspora. The reason being that the situation back at home is untenable. There's quality conditions, the high taxes for the people. The cost of living is very high. Prices are skyrocketing. People can't afford basic commodities. And the life is just out of reach for men.
Yeah, I mean, he goes on to, of course, Malema, I'm talking about here, to say that he goes on to talk about, SADC, South Africa and the African Union, saying that they've not been effective in helping Zimbabwe. Can we talk about that? Because you've mentioned some acknowledgements by SADC and the AU, but has there been enough of an intervention, even where the leadership perhaps or quality of elections is concerned in Zim?
Well, there's been an effort. I mean, for the first time, SADC came to the conclusion that the election itself was irregular, a first and historical position, because there's always been papering over, findings and solidarity of the different governments and leaderships. But what we have seen in the last election, the previous elections, have been endorsed by SADC, but this one, SADC came out and said this election was not proper, and I think that effort must be appreciated. And of course, the African Union and Chamisa and other international bodies. So yes, enough needs to be done, but I think the effort has to be appreciated. Comrade Malema is correct to say Zimbabweans have a duty to make sure that the situation is dealt with. We need freedom. We need democracy. We need free and fair elections. We need accountability of government. We need to deal with the tyranny that we have. For the past years, decades of tyranny, decades of autocracy, we thought that by having Mr. Mugabe going out or exiting the political stage, we were having a new dispensation, but we've seen that it has been a new deception. We have seen that we have actually jumped from a frying pan into the fire. The situation has gotten worse. Dictatorship is in the schools. Authoritarianism is consolidated, and that is where we find ourselves.
Let's talk about one of the issues that he's raised, of course, is the possibility of President Emmerson Mnangagwa ruling in Zim, possibly beyond his constitutional limit. I mean, how much of a concern is that for you, and the likelihood that you think the president would likely do so?
Well, we'll resist that. In fact, all Zimbabweans are resisting it. Mr. Mnangagwa must understand that he has outstayed and overstayed his welcome. This previous election, he didn't win. You can't come through the back door. And once you have come through the back door, you want to extend the house that you have actually criminally occupied. That cannot be allowed, and we will not allow it. There has to be a proper election. There has to be a proper government. There has to be an understanding of the reforms that are supposed to be instituted and a transitional mechanism so that Zimbabwe is restored back to normalcy and democracy and majority rule. That is what we must be working on. This whole thing of extending his rule is a big issue for the people of Zimbabwe. And Zimbabweans are already clearly organizing themselves to make sure that they resist any unconstitutional and criminal legal extension of term, which term is actually contested.
Yeah, there's something to be said, though, about the role of the opposition where, I suppose, a quality democracy stands, right? I mean, there's, for instance, here in South Africa, we've just entered what we call a government of national unity, a party that previously was the official opposition, now working with formerly known as the governing party, still governing, of course, the African National Congress in this new government. This has been an option that you possibly could have looked at as well as a former leader within the opposition, and you've made it quite clear that this is not something that you're keen on. Talk to us about why.
Well, look, I must say that I've been shouting my voice hoarse as a leader of the alternative to say we have to find each other as a people. There has to be political dialogue. There has to be political settlement in Zimbabwe. There has to be an understanding on fundamentals around electoral reforms, around political reforms and constitutional reforms. And these reforms must actually be a product of Zimbabweans coming together to look at what should be dealt with in terms of the deficits we have seen. It's common cause that we have problems with elections, we have problems with governance. It's common cause that it is politics stupid, it is governance stupid, it is leadership stupid. We are where we are because of the crisis of governance. And we have said we have to come together. The problem has been ZANU-PF. They are not willing to look at the problems affecting their country. They want to look at exogenous factors and foreigners around the issues. The biggest challenge we have in this country is the breakdown of good governance and the lack of rule of law. That is what we must address. Disputed elections and disputed national processes.
Yeah. One of the things that Malema said, and I want to step away from that a little bit, but just as we wrap up that thought, one of the things Malema has said is that he has, of course, urged Zimbabweans living in South Africa to return home to vote during the elections. I mean, I wonder what that does for the debate for those that are living here and see the situation in Zimbabwe. One of another debates that have come up this week, for instance, is the issue of what it costs for Zimbabweans living in South Africa to renew their passports. They've seen a 50% increase to just the cost of getting their passports at the consulate here in Gauteng, and they've argued that this is the Zim government taking advantage of the situation of those that are in the country. I mean, what do you say to the Zimbabweans that are living in Zim, perhaps wanting to come back home? Is that something that you would encourage? And what do you say to those who say there's nothing to go home to?
Well, I must say that the situation is quite tough for most citizens. If you look at just the past year, we've had a number of Zimbabweans, hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans leaving the country because they are seeking other better and greener pastures, better opportunities. So to invite people back into hell or to invite people back into this very difficult situation, I think would be disingenuous. We have to correct the settings. Yes, Zimbabweans have a role to play in elections, but the elections are actually not proper elections. So even if Zimbabweans were to come, look at what happened in the past election. People were in the queues. The ballot papers were not there. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission could not produce 5 ballot papers. And it actually turned out that Mr. Mnangagwa's friend, Witness Chivayo, a business person, who has actually printing the ballot papers, is the one who was playing the sabotage. The election was just a sham. So to talk of elections and Zimbabweans coming to those elections and participating is a bit of a challenge. But we have to fix our own issues. Zimbabweans have to fix their own issues. As regards the issue of passport, even here at home, I spoke of the taxes that are too high. Even the passport, I think we are the highest in terms of charges for the passport. Why? Because they realize, the government, that Zimbabweans are leaving the country. So we have to deal with our own issues. in a very and very comprehensive
So
manner.
how, let me let me ask you this, and then you can finish off that thought, but I'm running out of time here, Advocate Chamisa. But I think there's the issue that you have of a contentious one here in South Africa, where there is that that strained relationship at times in communities where, you know, we've seen operations like Operation Dudula, for instance, that have come out and said, no, we have too many undocumented people in South Africa, particularly some coming from Zimbabwe. So what do we do about that very debate here in South Africa? Where would you like to see that discussion go?
Well, the key thing is for the South African government to help Zimbabweans help themselves. How do they do so? They do so by not expressing solidarity with dictatorship. They do so by helping Zimbabweans have proper processes, proper elections, and of course to resolve their politics. Right now, we have over 100 political activists who are incarcerated, political prisoners. There's no solidarity. There's no support from the countries that are supposed to support us. That solidarity will go a long way, particularly from the South African government, and also calling out what is not proper and making sure that they characterize evil for what it is. They cannot continue this thing of burying their head in the sand. We need to be able to articulate the issues as they are. It's a dictatorship and it must be dealt with. We can't have a black apartheid being endorsed just because by skin color it is the same color. We can't. And we have to be able to stand and be fair, to say enough is enough. Zimbabwe must be fixed. What is broken must be corrected. And that is where we count on the South African brothers and sisters, to help us help ourselves.
All right. Mr. Chamisa, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.